Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Green Dragon Podcast. I'm your host, Tom, today, and we're delighted to have Joe Phillipps back on the show. He was here the last summer, and we had a really fun conversation talking about patriotic music through history. Um, Good friend of mine, we went to school together, and now he's picking up law, and we're going to share his thoughts on that, his experience, and then maybe dive in a bit to the Socratic method, what that looks like in law school, and then just kind of the idea in general. Um, so yeah, we're thanks for coming on, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Man, it seems like it's been too long. I've been thinking a lot about like our conversations about um law school, and I don't know, like, what does have things been getting more intense now, like being second semester almost finished, or is it kind of like a usual grind that you just get used to?
Um, it's a little bit of both. And that's probably that's a absolute lawyer answer. Yeah, it depends. No.
Sure.
So your first semester is really spent just figuring out what works for you. Um, there was a lot of carryover in the amount of work and sort of the method of preparing for classes from Wyoming Catholic. It was very similar, so there wasn't a huge learning curve for me, though I know there were a lot of people, first semesters figuring out the law school code, kind of cracking the code, because they tell you one thing. They tell you how many hours you need to put into all the readings versus how many hours you spend in class, and they tell you what they're looking for, but that's also just an unreasonable and unsustainable goal to have if you want to have a life.
Mm.
And they say really you should only have time to sleep. So
Oh,
um, it's intense, and if you want to be able to have time at night to turn the brain off and watch TV or read something not law related, you kind of have to figure out what works best for you. Second semester, it gets easier in the sense that a number of your courses are going to carry over from the first semester. So I'm taking contracts two with the same teacher I took contracts one with. I'm taking civil procedure two with the same teacher as civil procedure one. So um I know what those teachers are looking for. I've kind of learned their method. um I know if I'm going to get called on, these are the types of questions they're going to ask. um Whereas property is a one semester class for us, and it was a brand new teacher. No one knew what to expect. Um, so it is a little easier in that sense, but it's all there's also so it kind of carries over, but we're taking one less doctrinal class. There's a little less substantive meat that we have to digest
uh-huh.
this semester. So first semester we were doing contract, civil procedure, criminal law, and torts. And now we're just doing contract, civil procedure, and property. And then we have some more skills-based classes on top of that. So legal research and writing, and then another course on legal problem solving, which is kind of like bar prep for one else. So
Mm.
um it's a little bit easier. Uh, the schedule is certainly lighter. I have a lot more free time during the day, which I'm using to do homework, which is freeing up my time at night to either go to Bible study or just actually make dinner instead of having to meal prep or just relax. You have to set a cutoff time for yourself,
Mm.
um, based on your living habits, when you get up, when you go to bed, kind of thing, because you can't do it right up until the minute you go to bed. So then you're gonna start dreaming about it, and you're gonna wake up at 3 in the morning wondering what the elements of battery are. So
Like, I thought I knew it, but wait a minute. Oh man, this that sounds pretty stressful actually. Like, at least for me, I mean, back from WCC, I remember like um I'd always cut studying off, I think at 8 o'clock at night. So I would give myself permission to study all day long till 8, and then I had to stop unless something really important was coming up, like finals week or something. Um, and I found that really helpful just to give yourself that, even if let's say you didn't use your break doing anything that fun or something, just telling yourself that there's an end point to the day is so massive.
Yeah. It is really a matter of treating it like a 9 to 5 job. So like my
Mm,
Mondays and my Wednesdays are jam packed. I don't get a break from 9:45 until 3:30. It's just bumper to bumper work. Um, but then I don't have class until noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I have a big chunk of time off on Fridays as well.
mm,
Um, I try to treat it like an 8 to 5 job. So at 8 o'clock, I'm in the law building, even if I'm not in class. I'm at my study spot. On we have two sides. We have a loud side and a silent side of our library. So and you can reserve a desk for the semester on the silent side. So I've got my own little space, and I just try to treat it like a job. I show up 8 o'clock. I've got a cup of coffee, and I am sitting at my desk, and I'm reading the next day's assignments. I try to keep a day ahead. Some people try to get like really ahead on the syllabus, and I don't understand how that works for them, but good on them. I try to keep a day ahead. That way, if something happens, if life happens or there's an event or something, and I don't get to sit down and study, I'm still ahead of the work, and I have that extra bit of padding to get caught up. Um, but if I'm not in class between the 8 to 5 period, I'm at my desk and I'm doing my readings. And what happens is that gives me time to actually sit down from 5 to 6 and make dinner and actually enjoy dinner.
mm.
And then from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, do any whatever carryover there is from the rest of the day. And I try to make that more for like writing projects. If I've got a paper or something, that's when I'm in my apartment working on something other than just reading cases. And then
Mm.
at 8 o'clock, I try to shut off the brain, watch some TV, and be in bed before 10. So
Nice. I feel like that's a pretty good split. I've heard too, like, um, a lot of people talk about like even if you work from home, like to set a desk aside in your house as like your place to work. Um, so I like how you're able to like reserve a desk in the library. That's pretty awesome.
yeah, and it's funny you say that because I've talked to people who like have to really compartmentalize their home office space. You know, their work area can't be where they sleep. Now I'm in a small apartment with a roommate, so I can't necessarily do that. We have
Yeah.
like a little common area, and then my room has to be both my workspace and my bedroom. But I do make it feel like two completely different spaces based on what I'm doing, just by um putting on an ambient light or putting on some music. So like it's just a different vibe when I'm in there working versus when it's time to relax, turn on the switch, play some games, whatever. So
Yeah. I think that's really important. It's something I've learned about from a guy, I think I've told you about him, Jim Quick. He's a he calls himself a brain coach, which is kind of like how to optimize your memory, speed reading, all that sort of stuff. And he talks about they're called Pomodoro. Uh, they're either not methods, but like it's like a time capsule. Like give yourself 20 minutes to study and then give a few minute break because they found that
right.
like having those short durations of high intensity and then breaks allows you to remember more and you kind of like use your mental faculties to their full potential. So,
One of my friends, I think used that method for a while. I don't know if he still is, but I remember like the first week we got there and we had no idea what any teachers were expecting. So we just were ready to read every single assignment, line word for word, and just be ready to go in with this deep knowledge of all the readings. Between Saturday and Sunday, it was 12 hours of homework. Um,
well,
but that was the method he had. He'd have a timer there and he'd go for 20 minutes and then take or it was like 20, 25 minutes 5-minute break and just kind of operate in these little 30-minute increments and slowly make his way through the work.
Mhm. Do you find this is kind of a question that I've had for a while, like how do you get used to legalese prose? Or like I guess the way they write.
So
It's always fascinated me.
they just kind of throw you in.
Uh,
Um, you learn it the first couple of cases you read. It's kind of like you're on you know you're on the scavenger hunt, but you don't know what you're looking for. So you're just kind of parsing through dense words and trying to figure it out. Um, we did a number of critical reading assignments this at the beginning of this semester, which I found helpful. Because even though like I'm not someone that necessarily struggled with understanding the cases after the first few, um, there's a number of different strategies you can use because law is kind of like its own language.
mm,
So it's a matter of maybe you have to read it out loud. Maybe you need to break a sentence down into its parts. Legalese is infamous for just having these like block paragraphs that are one sentence.
yeah.
And um and it's the same with like some of the rules, some of the statutes that we have to memorize. It's like, well, if I break this down into five elements, even if they're not elements as you might properly know them in legal terms, it helps you understand the different things the different components you're looking for in this rule. Um, so it might be doing that. It might be looking for important connector words like and or. So
Mm,
and the other thing we learned from like day one is there are supplements out there. There's a great supplement out there. I'm not sponsoring this. I promise I'm not sponsored. Called Quimby, and it costs quite a bit of money, but pretty much every case in our books, there is a pre-written commercial case brief out there. So
mm,
a brief basically takes what the actual case and breaks it down into its parts for you and explains it in layman's terms.
mm,
So what's the legal issue? What rule, what's the rule that we get from this case? What are the facts and what was the court's reasoning? Um, and what was the holding? So that's really helpful. And that's exactly what you are trying to do from day one to come prepared for class. So you ask, those first few days, yeah, they throw us into it. They don't teach you how to read a case. They teach you how to brief a case. So they're saying, all right, when you read, you want to look for issue, rule, holding, facts, and reasoning. And they gave us a set formula for how to do it. And then pretty quickly we all learned, well, each teacher is going to want something different. But basically, you start just by when you write these briefs, rewriting what the case says verbatim, just organizing it. So if someone asks tell me the facts of the case, you can just look down and where you have a big header that says facts, read it, and then you eventually learn as you're discussing these cases with teachers, you start to pick up on common terms. You start to be able to pick through all the heretofores and henceforths and thereto after.
mm.
um, so it's not it doesn't I don't it's not as complicated as it seems, and I don't know if that's just me saying it having done it for a semester and a half. Um, but you kind of just learn by doing.
Guess that makes sense. Yeah. It always seems so intimidating. Like when I read like documents for work, um, like right now we're trying to set up a marketplace for Lifeline. So I was talking to one of my dad's lawyers, and he was helping me write up a seller agreement. And like it's only like 2.5 pages, but even that I'm like, I don't know what's really going on here.
Oh, contracts are meant to be cryptic. I'll tell you something. In contracts
Oh,
class, we we read cases where the contracts are in dispute and the cases might bring to light a particular clause in the contract that's a problem. We are not going through and reading learning how to draft a contract. That's its own separate course. And I think
Oh,
eventually that's probably all going to be taken over by AI because you can already have chat gpt, write you a contract. So um
well.
we're learning all about how to how to make sure that an agreement is legally binding, and
Hmm.
um if also understanding like all the invalidating causes. So if this contract isn't good, why is it not good, and why should the court rescind it?
Is that kind of like what makes a good lawyer is able to see all the holes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The A good lawyer is, so there are things four components to a law school exam, um which in my opinion are kind of like the four really, really big three skills that you pull out of these four components. There's the we call it IRAC. Ask any law student and they'll tell you about IRAC: issue, rule, application, conclusion. So when you sit down for your law school exam, you have maybe some multiple choice questions, but when you get to the essays, you get a dense scenario. It's just a complicated fact pattern. Half of the facts are probably fluff that you're not going to need. um, some of it's probably red herrings intended to trip you up.
Hmm.
Your job is to first spot all the legal issues, and the call of the questions are never anything specific. It might be as vague as identify legal issues and resolve. Um,
Oh.
so you got to find, if the teacher's generous, like in criminal law, it might be what are the relevant charges for these people? What are the relevant defenses? But more often than not, you just got to find what could potentially be wrong with this and talk about it. So spotting the legal issues, writing down the relevant rule that you've memorized, and all of its components, and then application. This is the big one for a lawyer. So your job as a lawyer is to be able to take whatever facts you're given and apply it to the governing rule, and have it basically come out the way you want it to. So on a lot of these essays, the application section is really trying to figure out how to twist these facts um into the rule. So you know or giving both, get a full analysis, giving all the different ways it could go. A lot of times law school exams are extremely vague in their facts, and it's not enough to say, well, the facts aren't clear so I can't make a conclusion. No, you have to explain, well, if if the facts are vague, but if the person does A, then this is how it applies to the rule and therefore they win. But also if they do B, then that won't apply and therefore they won't win, kind of thing. So
Hmm.
you kind of have to be able to look at it from all angles. Um, but yeah, and then you have your conclusion, which is just taking all that and slapping it down in a one sentence. Therefore, but I would say the big three skills come from a law school exam, and that's the issue spotting, knowing your rules, and then the big one is application. So
Hmm. That's really neat. I guess I've always been curious, like how that process works, and then like what separates a good lawyer from an average lawyer. And it seems like it's generally like them understanding kind of like the whole process of law and then how to apply that to a case in the best presentation possible. Like it almost seems like a lot of it has to do with presentation, does it? You'd say, or
it does. It
yeah.
does. Um, I definitely lost points on exams because um I didn't say anything wrong. I just didn't write it the best way I could. When you're
Oh.
in the moment, as our teacher or one professor says, in the heat of battle, you will forget something. And for me, it was not going in like any sort of good order or natural flow or organizing anything. I just kind of was stream of conscience, just dumping as I was going. And so I said everything right, but it was very scattered and all over the
Ah,
place. Um, and it's true when you have 3 hours on the clock and you have to cover all this long list of issues that you've spotted, you just start throwing things against the wall and hoping it's going to stick. Especially if you're sitting there going, I don't remember that. That's there's something there and I don't know what it is. So you start like just putting everything you know down. Um, but yeah, presentation's a big part of it. And that's trial law too. So I've gotten to sit in on some mock trial. I'm learning about the appellate process right now because our big capstone project is going to be giving an oral argument. This whole semester in legal research and writing is all about persuasive writing. So there's that presentation again.
mm,
Our client should win, and here's why.
ah, yeah. Ah, I feel like I don't know. Do you find it like do you find the stress kind of exciting? Or do you find it like
It motivates me.
yeah,
It motivates me. Because there's two types of stress. There's the type of stress as in like I've got a problem and I have to solve it, and then there's just that unnecessary type of stress.
yeah.
Um, Law school is a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I will say I'm happy to say this publicly. The law school as an institution is designed to, especially 1L year, to weed out the people that are just there to make the money. And so there are any time you feel like you're being inconvenienced by the number of deadlines they throw at you, by the lack of instruction given. It's all intended to scare you.
Yeah.
Um, there's a saying, 1L year, they scare you to death. 2L year, they work you to death. And 3L year, they bore you to death. So,
Oh man. It's quite a gauntlet there.
right. So there's a lot of unnecessary stress that comes with it. But then I don't know. I like to solve a problem, and it comes back to haunt you no matter what. You do everything you can. We had this hilarious torts final involving pink mail trucks and Taylor Swift fans. And um, there was this whole thing about the mail truck and a products liability question. And over Christmas break, I woke up at like 3 in the morning and was like, I never talked about the fact that it was pink. I wonder if that was important. So
Oh, that's funny. Uh, like missing the obvious almost.
yeah, yeah. It's very easy in law school to not see the forest for the trees because
Mm,
you're going one concept at a time, some classes at hyper speed. Um, and it's not, it's hard to see how all the pieces fit together until you take a step back.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's like you almost have to be in the deep for a while, and then you like once you step back, it all kind of clicks together. I mean, I felt
We have
that.
this we have this thing in law school called outlines, and they're basically your study guides. So
Oh,
um, pretty much from day one or maybe week one, you want to start working on your outline for a class. And so basically you take whatever notes you took in class and you start just consolidating everything over to a separate document. The key terms, rules. Um, if the teacher is someone who really cares about case law, cases, um, and how those cases kind of all fit together. And then what you have is an ongoing, living, breathing document that's growing with you through the semester. And then when you hit finals week, um, you have a study guide and you don't have to cram to try and type one up during, in the weekend before finals start. You can just kind of keep going back and reviewing throughout the semester.
that's nice.
Um, that definitely helps.
Do you think? then finals would be a little less or not as bad there as WCC, or do you think it's kind of comparable?
I wish I had known about outlining when I was at WCC because,
Hmm.
especially with how integrated everything was there, it would have been really helpful to have that sort of organizational structure. Um, because I pulled some late nights, especially freshman, sophomore year, just trying to like cram everything into my head last minute. Um, yeah, that was rough.
It was. I remember those late nights. Study study
Oh,
parties and
shush. You used to go to bed early.
well, I would, but like I remember a few nights I stayed up like extra late, but yeah. Ah, I was wondering, you mentioned that like Socratic dialogue is like kind of like the bones of law. Uh, could you kind of like say more about that? Because I'd love to hear thoughts about it.
Yeah. So, as far as I understand it, Um, so law school is taught using the case study method, which
Mm,
is kind of like a version of the Socratic dialogue. So, prior to the 1880s, I think it was, law students just memorized the rules. They were given the federal rules of civil procedure. Um, they were given whatever consolidated book of the law they had for whatever subject, and they just memorized them. Um, and then I think it was the dean at Harvard at the time came up with this case study method. So now what we do in most of our classes is we read cases,
mm,
hundreds upon hundreds of cases, and the teacher will cold call you. So you fill out a seating chart at the beginning of the year, and where you're sitting is probably where you're going to be for the remainder of the semester.
mm.
Um, teacher gets it. Teachers, some teachers have a system where they go alphabetical and it's easy to know who's up next. Other teachers call you at complete and total random, and you're going to have to give them whatever they want on that case. And it might be simply, what are the facts of the case? What happened in this case? Might be what did the court say? Some professors will just have you basically teach the class the case
Oh
and have a
wow.
dialogue. But the purpose of this was rather than just memorizing rules, you would use cases to build the rule.
Mm,
So when we were studying in torts, battery,
hmm.
we read a number of cases that gave us a different component. Okay, in this case, we know that battery is defined as a harmful or offensive physical contact. Um, in this case, we learned that it doesn't have to be a direct contact with the person's body. You could have a battery by snatching something out of their hands. In
Oh,
this
interesting.
case, we learned that not every physical contact with a person is going to be considered a battery because the world is just so naturally crowded. Some degree of physical contact is expected. In this case, we learned that it's intentional. So what you do is you read four cases, and now you can kind of formulate a rule statement around that. And then and that's the dialogue. The teacher's going to start asking you, well, what do we get from this case? What rule can we synthesize from this handful of cases? And then so rather than just telling you what to think, you're learning how to think. It's that same thing that we learned at WCC. um, it's the process of human thought. So and that's the entire backbone of law school.
Well, that's really neat. Because I think I've told you about him, but Ed Milet, he talks about how the process of thinking is asking and answering questions. Um, so just thinking back on our times at WCC, I think like when the professor asks a question at the beginning, it sets you in the mind of like trying to answer it. So you start thinking about the material more in depth and start trying to conclude like what you're saying for law school. Like you read the four cases and you find out what is battery. You're looking for the themes and kind of like almost the essence of what the something is. And then once you
Mhm.
get it, you're like, oh, then you can almost start to see all the implications of what it means.
Oh yeah. And what's interesting is not every class does. Some classes will do this kind of thing where we build the rule statement and the cases are how we build the rule. Other classes kind of do an ops do sort of like the inverse approach. So like when I took
Uh,
criminal law, the teachers told us straight up, this is what murder is. This is what homicide is, and now let's go, and break it down that way. This is what he's like, this is what rape is. The common law says there are two elements for what rape is: forced consent. But then the cases show us how different jurisdictions interpret those two things. Okay, well, what does consent mean? What does
oh,
force mean? And we would actually have these discussions. We read these cases, and he'd be like, "Well, what do you think about that? How do you feel about that? You know,
huh,
do we like that?" The number of times he'd ask you, "Well, do we like that?" But what it did was it made you think about, well, one, how important knowing your jurisdiction is, um, but just like understanding the nuances to something as simple as two words: force and consent. So um I've used that example pretty much in every job interview I've had so far for internships. And the same thing goes for like our contracts class where we're learning all the defenses to contracts right now. Like they'll give you the elements for it right there and tell you these are the components of undue influence or of misrepresentation. And now we're going to read some cases and talk about a little bit more about what those actually mean. How do the courts interpret that? So
huh. So like, would you have to be pretty familiar with your jurisdiction, like just through practice? Like, let's say if you were doing court cases, would you have to understand pretty much like how they interpreted stuff by the cases that they've had? Was that like how you'd
a
prepare
lot of
or
it's going to for everything we learn in law school is to gear us towards being able to take the bar. And as soon
right?
as you get into the practice, it's going to be knowing, what does your jurisdiction say? What does the statute say? I
Oh,
mean, there should be a lot of commonality among from state to state, because the bar exam, I think, is among 30 some odd states. They've got a uniform bar exam now. So
hmm,
I can take the same exam in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Ohio. And then depending on how well I score, I can transfer my license rather than having to take Pennsylvania's bar and Ohio's and New Jersey's all separately.
that's nice.
Um, so uh, there should be a lot of commonality, but um, different jurisdictions figured out different ways to look for, interpret, like insanity, criminal insanity. It's a big one. There's like all these different tests that you can use, the court will use to determine whether or not a criminal insanity defense is valid. And that's all jurisdiction based. So
Interesting. Huh, that's wild. Have you been called a lot in your class or yeah?
no, actually, I
No.
volunteer a lot. So if
Oh,
people get stuck, I'll usually raise my hand. Um, I think the teachers talk because they they don't cold call the people that they know do really well. Um, and I know a lot of the top performers, you hear them more because they're volunteering and less because they're being cold called. I've really only been cold called in classes where I knew I was coming up because the teachers were going alphabetically. Um, but yeah, no, there's one class I have yet to be called on, cold called in so far. So you never
wow.
know.
How many people are generally in your class? Is it a couple hundred or is it small?
We started at 87. Now you lose people. We've lost some because they've just dropped out.
Okay.
Um, family issues, health issues. Um, so I think we're down to 80 now. Um, and most of us, actually, we're all in one class now. there was a group that came in the summer and they got to take torts before the rest of us. Um, so our torts class was smaller, but this semester everyone's taking the same classes. So we have a big classroom that looks like a courtroom. It actually has been used as a courtroom. The Ohio Court of Appeals actually came last week and did a session at the school for us to come and observe.
Hmm.
So it's a big space. Um, it's it's good to volunteer. It's good to speak up. You do get the I have had the reputation of being a gunner, so I've dialed that back a little bit. But and I try to offer, we call it co-counsel. If someone's struggling with a question, um, I try to raise my hand. Some teachers won't take volunteers. They will want to let that person struggle, and because they'll learn from it. So they'll be like 20 hands going up around this person, and they're sitting there sweating, and the teacher will be like, "No, put it down." They just have their sights set on that student.
Oh, ouch. Dang, that'd be intense. It's
A
what?
choir director once said, "If you're going to make a mistake, make it big." So like, just
Oh,
I always tell the real ones aren't going to judge you for struggling.
uh-huh.
There will be those people that will, um, but you
Yeah.
know, you learn from those things. You learn from the embarrassment. You learn from saying something so dumb that everyone laughs. I certainly have.
Oh. I mean, I guess like being like if it was random and you're caught off guard, I feel like you kind of lose everything out the window, like you stand up and everything's gone. Like, well, I had this all down, but now it's not.
It's dramatic. Our contracts teacher, like when we go to a case, there'll be this long silence as he goes to the podium and he looks at the roster and they tries to figure out where you are in the room and he'll be like,
Uh-oh.
and then he'll call the name and you'll be like,
You just like sink in your chair, like, I hope it doesn't see me. Oh, yeah. That's interesting. The reason uh I've been thinking about Socratic dialogue is just like so I've been studying few different things lately, but one of them is like language, and language is essentially like an information protocol. So it's like a set chosen words in a specific order to denote meaning. That's pretty basic understanding language, but um the reason Socratic dialogue has been on my mind a bit lately is like how are effective communicators speaking so that they're always almost like contributing to each other's information. So it's like someone says like, for example, just like they give a quick story on what happened today, and the next person can add on to that and like kind of flourish it and kind of bring it to a new direction. And like the people that are that like you wouldn't really want to talk to just kind of like give you a nice little affirmation, like, well, that sounded nice. And it kind of just stops it right there. And you're like, well, you almost have to like pick up again and start a new conversation. You can't really build on it. And um, like I noticed towards our senior year at school, like we almost had a flow. Like every person kind of understood the cues, the ideas, like people would go with what kind of interest they had. We bring the conversation. And so I've wondered like if Socratic method really is the preferred way of learning how to speak in more of a, I guess, a learning environment. Um, but I guess you could even go outside of that if you were like at a dinner table. It's almost like a Socratic dialogue too, It's like someone asks a question and you kind of like everyone gets their take on it. Um, but what are your thoughts, Joe? Like, do you
I
think,
I th-
yeah, go
I
ahead.
think it teaches us to think before we speak,
Mm,
which is a skill that we have lost as a society.
right.
Probably in no small part thanks to these. Um, it was funny. I watched. Socratic dialogue at its finest in civil procedure the other day. We had read um, a fairly politically sensitive case
Mm,
post 9/11 regarding a Muslim man who had been taken into custody by the FBI after 9/11, detained in Gitmo, and filed a number of lawsuits against the director of the FBI and the Attorney General at the time for how he was treated in Gitmo. The case was in there for a procedural question, but there was a lot of there were a lot of opinions about the political undertones of it, the discrimination issues, and one of my colleagues said, "Well, the FBI was just doing their job. He said he was a Marine, and you just do. You don't ask questions. You do what you're told." And so he was trying to kind of push back against what was kind of devolving into a social justice argument. And
mm,
then our professor said, "Well, okay, I appreciate your logic. Let me change the facts on you. What if this was white Christian extremists who decide to blow up the White House? Under your logic, FBI says round them up, and now we're going to detain white Christian men. Are you okay with that? Just go and detain all the white Christian men that you can find. Are you okay with that?" And it was great because he basically had to either admit, okay, I got my foot in my mouth, or double down. And he did. He doubled down, and he was like, "Well, I guess yeah. By that logic, sure, yeah, whatever." And she was like, "Okay, so what are you? Where does the Constitution go?" And it was like it was like watching a platonic dialogue happening in real life. Um,
that's
and it
cool.
was like, I don't know, it was a think before you speak kind of moment
Uh-huh.
for him, for my colleague. So um, that's what I think.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. It's it's so interesting, l- like doing reflecting on like how you think and how your process of coming to a conclusion happens because there's like we were saying, like that guy is like he goes in hard and then he's like, well, either have to bail or double down. And it definitely like starts to make you question like, oh, maybe I should really think about what I believe in, like fundamentally, and then those fundamentals will help me understand in a more dialogue setting like what I should say. So it's almost like Socratic dialogue really is like a Platonic idea and that it brings you back to the roots, like your starting point. And doing that
Mhm.
more and more, like you have to cement like what are your true beliefs, and then those are like your axioms that you can then take your conversation from. Yeah, that's so cool. I've been thinking a lot about language lately, just because I've been kind of diving into some older movies, and the I think the charming thing about a lot of old movies was the dialogue. Like people were so witty and sharp and fast, like with all their like I mean I guess like I'm thinking like like Danny Kaye or Bing Crosby or someone like that, they're just like at it, like back and forth roasting each other left and right, or like having a good time or something like that. And um yeah, I guess it's like what you're saying, like the cell phones that kind of just put us into the same kind of vanilla language of just like that's cool, that's awesome, that's dope, or that's awful, that's sad, whatever. So kind of like we get our whole life in six adjectives, instead of like how do you actually curate your language to really convey what you're meaning or feeling or thinking? And I do think that's something that's cool about law students is that I think they have a much greater command of their language, at least the lawyers I know. So,
Um, no comment.
oh,
Um, No, I agree. I think I don't read my colleagues' work, so I can't speak for any of my colleagues. Um, in as far as legal writing, yes, I
Hmm.
think you have to. Um, you have to be able to communicate a specific way, a very particular way.
Uh-huh.
Otherwise, your client's not going to win. Um,
Right. Yeah.
we're still getting there in the public speaking, though. A lot
Mm.
of my colleagues are still, and we're still only at 1L here, but um, the number of questions that get answered with personally, I feel
Oh, no, no.
that's no, 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 no. There's nothing personal about this. This is the law. There's nothing about your feelings that in this right now. It's the law. So we're still learning that, I don't know if it's more of a, or I would say that's the other one. I would say, I don't know if it's that people are still reading the room. They don't want to commit to an answer. So they kind of give this
Yeah.
sort of, but yeah, we're learning. But in the writing, I would agree with you.
Mm. Have
I
you?
also can't
Yeah.
speak for every single law student in America because I go to a small non-competitive school, so well less competitive than say Harvard. Um,
Sure. Yeah. No, I was just thinking like lawyers that have been in practice for a while. Like I have a couple friends, probably 10, 15 years now. It seems like just being around, being very specific with language, it almost like feeds into like how they talk about other things. So like they're very direct or they're um very concise or very drawn out depending what they want to do. Have you followed Alina Habba, Trump's lawyer? Do you know her?
I have not. No,
Okay. Um, she's really cool. So she's been doing the case. Ooh, she's done a few, but most of the ones for like the big lawsuits over nothing have come up. And like so she's a Middle Eastern immigrant practicing Catholic. And boy, does she lay down the law. Like, like she does not hold back. And I was like, dang, like, how do you get that confident and just like everything you say? Like, she never misses a beat. Like, press conference, they ask her a question, 2 minute answer just drills right into them. And you're like, oh, I feel bad for that reporter. And you're just like,
it's
keeps going.
practice.
Yeah.
That's practice. I'll tell you that. I got to pose as a witness in a, mock trial practice a few weeks ago, and got to watch a couple of our 3Ls who are unbelievable advocates. Um, and you know, they had one witness on the stand who was really giving her an attitude, and she ran his head up his butt. It was unbelievable. She just did not let any of the snark, any of the disrespect phase her. She just was like, "That wasn't my question. This is, your fault. I'm laying down the law. I'm leading. This is my game. You're just here. You're just playing, and you don't want to play my by my rules. We're gonna have a problem." So,
Wow.
um, and a
Dang.
couple of them on the team are like that. So I know it comes from practice, and it comes from being broken down and built up. I've heard the stories about our mock trial team, just in the angst and the stress, and so lawyers have to be direct, and that means getting beat up sometimes. I talk to a lawyer sometimes, a family friend of mine, and she's just so blunt with me if I explain something incorrectly, or she's like, no, that's not right, that's the wrong type of language, and just very to the point and not really caring about feelings, because there really isn't room for that in the profession. You
Hmm.
you take bullets on a daily basis, and you got to be able to just eyes forward and do your thing.
Be a Wolverine, just don't let it bother you.
There's footage of, I think it's in the 80s or 90s, of Queen Elizabeth II in some procession on horseback, and someone fired a gun at her, and she did not flinch. I think she just kind of went, and just kept going.
Whoa. Dang.
And that's what we have to do. That really is. Um, so it comes from practice. I always say, I've said to people, if I get, you know, flayed by a teacher in class, if I get a not as good of a grade as I wanted on a paper, I'm gonna, I when I'm in my room, when I'm in my apartment, I'm behind closed doors. Yeah, I can have my drink and I can have my pity party and I can have my existential crisis. But the minute I set foot out of that apartment, I got my best outfit on and it's business.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's a new day and it's, time to learn from that. So,
right. I definitely would build resilience, I would imagine. Kind of that
oh yeah.
tough skin. Oh, well, Joe, it was a pleasure to have you on again tonight. Thanks so much for coming on the show again and for sharing us your experience with law so far and then yeah, kind of giving us an insider look. Uh Definitely have to have you on again soon. Um
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
yeah, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Joe. And we'll have to maybe fun to do a live one soon. That'd be fun. But
Yes,
yeah, maybe we could have bourbon or something over that one. Something to look forward
sounds
to.
good to me.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, to our listeners, thank you again for listening and please follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram for our daily reels and content. Um, yeah, thank you for listening to the show, and we'll see you next time.